Hello there. Hello, Pauline and Marion and Evelyn and, something like don't have it, something or other with a bunch of numbers. I'm not very good at remembering from there to here. And then there was an array of people that flashed up. I'm so glad you're all joining me. I'm Gildart, and this is Fireside Reading, where every day I sit in front of the fire at 5 Pacific Live and read. This is my wife and my fireplace. This is our living room, and I read to anyone who might like to join us. We've been doing it since the start of the lockdown, and it's a lovely part of my day, and I am so pleased that it's a lovely part of other people's days too. It's really nice how this has grown and is growing, and it's become a little venture from an initial just offering. As many of you, all of you probably know, I imagined when we got locked down, my mother, who was old and sadly not with us, but if she had been, she'd have been in her 90s and alone in her little house in England. And she would have been lonely. And I figured that there would be other people who might want company. And then that has grown beyond people wanting company into people who love old books, into people who love to be read to, into people who love this community. I love it when you guys sort of talk amongst yourself and say hello, and that's really one of the most satisfying things, that a little group of people is growing and getting to know one another. That's really lovely. And the same is happening on YouTube too, where people, it's not quite the same in that there's no interaction between the people listening, but there are several people who listen and watch on YouTube, and that's really very satisfying too. We're currently in the middle of a passage to India. My mum, aforementioned, grew up in India, and maybe because of resistance as a young chap, I don't know really, but I didn't read these sort of classic English in India books when I was younger. So it's really lovely to read it here. I'm so glad I am. It's really quite enlightening, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Welcome to a fireside reading of A Passage to India, Chapter 8. Although Miss Quested had known Ronnie well in England, she felt well advised to visit him before deciding to be his wife. India had developed sides of his character that she had never admired. His self-complacency, his censoriousness, his lack of subtlety, all grew vivid beneath a tropic sky. He seemed more indifferent than of old to what was passing in the minds of his fellows, more certain that he was right about them, or that if he was wrong it didn't matter. When proved wrong, he was particularly exasperating. He always managed to suggest that she needn't have bothered to prove it. The point she made was never the relevant point, her arguments conclusive but barren. She was reminded that he had expert knowledge and she none, and that experience would not help her because she could not interpret it. A public school, London University, a year at a crammer's, a particular sequence of posts in a particular province, a fall from a horse and a touch of fever were presented to her as the only training by which Indians and all who reside in their country could be understood. The only training she could comprehend, that is to say, for, of course, above Ronnie, there stretched the higher realms of knowledge inhabited by calendars and Turtons who had been not 1 year in the country but 20, and whose instincts were superhuman. For himself, he made no extravagant claims. She wished he would. It was the qualified bray of the callow official, the "I'm not perfect, but" that got on her nerves. How gross he had been at Mr. Fielding's, spoiling the talk and walking off in the middle of the haunting song. As he drove them away in the tum-tum, her irritation became unbearable, and she did not realize that much of it was directed against herself. She longed for an opportunity to fly out at him, and since he felt cross too, and they were both in India, an opportunity soon occurred. They had scarcely left the college grounds before she heard him say to his mother, who was with him on the front seat, "What was that about caves?" And she promptly opened fire. "Mrs. Moore, your delightful doctor, has decided on a picnic instead of a party in his house. We are to meet him out there. You, myself, Mr. Fielding, Professor Godbole. Exactly the same party." "And where?" asked Ronnie. "The Malabar Caves." "Well, I'm blessed," he murmured after a pause. "Did he descend to any details?" "He did not. If you had spoken to him, we could have arranged them." He shook his head, laughing. "Have I said anything funny?" "I was only thinking how the worthy doctor's collar climbed up his neck." "I thought you were discussing the caves." "So I am. Aziz was exquisitely dressed from tie-pins to spats, but he had forgotten his back collar stud. And there you have the Indian all over. Inattention to detail, the fundamental slackness that reveals the race. Similarly, to meet in the caves as if they were the clock at Charing Cross, when they're miles from a station and each other. Have you been to them?" "No, but I know all about them, naturally." "Oh, naturally. Are you too pledged to this expedition, Mother?" "Mother is pledged to nothing," said Mrs. Moore, rather unexpectedly. "Certainly not to this polo. Will you drive up to the bungalow first and drop me there, please? I prefer to rest." "Drop me too," said Adela. "I don't want to watch polo either, I'm sure." "Simpler to drop the polo," said Ronnie. Tired and disappointed, he quite lost self-control and added in a loud, lecturing voice, "I won't have you messing about with Indians anymore. If you want to go to the Malabar Caves, you'll go under British auspices." "I've never heard of these caves. I don't know what or where they are," said Mrs. Moore, "but I really can't have," she tapped the cushion beside her, "so much quarrelling and tiresomeness." The young people were ashamed. They dropped her at the bungalow and drove on together to the polo, feeling it was the least they could do. Their crackling bad humor left them, but the heaviness of their spirit remained. Thunderstorms seldom clear the air. Miss Quested was thinking over her own behavior and didn't like it at all. Instead of weighing Ronnie and herself and coming to a reasoned conclusion about marriage, she had, incidentally, in the course of a talk about mangoes, remarked to mixed company that she didn't mean to stop in India, which meant that she wouldn't marry Ronnie. But what a way to announce it! What a way for a civilized girl to behave! She owed him an explanation, but unfortunately there was nothing to explain. The thorough talk, so dear to her principles and temperament, had been postponed until too late. There seemed no point in being disagreeable to him and formulating her complaints against his character at this hour of the day, which was the evening. The polo took place on the Maidan, near the entrance of Chandrapur city. The sun was already declining, and each of the trees held a premonition of night. They walked away from the governing group to a distant seat, and there, feeling that it was his due and her own, she forced out of herself the undigested remark, "We must have a thorough talk, Ronnie, I'm afraid." "My temper's rotten. I must apologize," was his reply. I didn't mean to order you and Mother about, but of course, the way these Bengalis let you down this morning annoyed me, and I don't want that sort of thing to keep happening. It's nothing to do with them that I... No, but Aziz would make some similar muddle over the caves. He meant nothing by the invitation. I could tell by his voice. It's just their way of being pleasant. It's something very different. Nothing to do with the caves that I wanted to talk with you about. She gazed at the colorless grass. I finally decided we are not going to be married, my dear boy. The news hurt Ronnie very much. He had heard Aziz announce that she would not return to the country, but had paid no attention to the remark, for he never dreamt that an Indian could be a channel of communication between two English people. He controlled himself and said gently, "You never said we should marry, my dear girl. You never bound either yourself or me. Don't let this upset you." She felt ashamed. How decent he was. He might force his opinions down her throat, but did not press her to an engagement because he believed, like herself, in the sanctity of personal relationships. It was this that had drawn them together at their first meeting, which had occurred among the grand scenery of the English lakes. Her ordeal was over, but she felt it should have been more painful and longer. Adela will not marry Ronnie. It seemed slipping away like a dream. She said, "But let us discuss things. It's also frightfully important. We mustn't make false steps. I want next to hear your point of view about me. It might help us both." His manner was unhappy and reserved. "I don't much believe in this discussing. Besides, I'm so dead with all this extra work Muharram's bringing, if you will excuse me." "I only want everything to be absolutely clear between us, and to answer any questions you care to put to me on my conduct." "But I haven't got any questions. You've acted within your rights. You were quite right to come out and have a look at me doing my work. It was an excellent plan, and anyhow, it's no use talking further. We should only get up steam." He felt angry and bruised. He was too proud to tempt her back, but he did not consider that she had behaved badly, because where his compatriots were concerned, he had a generous mind. "I suppose that there is nothing else. It's unpardonable of me to have given you and your mother all this bother," said Miss Quested heavily, and frowned up at the tree beneath which they were sitting. A little green bird was observing her, so brilliant and neat that it might have hopped straight out of a shop. On catching her eye, it closed its own, gave a small skip, and prepared to go to bed. Some Indian wild bird. "Yes. Nothing else," she repeated, feeling that a profound and passionate speech ought to have been delivered by one or both of them. "We've been awfully British over it, but I suppose that's all right." "As we are British, I suppose it is. Anyhow, we've not quarrelled, Ronnie." "Oh, that would have been too absurd. Why should we quarrel?" "I think we shall keep friends." "I know we shall." "Quite so." As soon as they had exchanged this admission, a wave of relief passed through them both, and then transformed itself into a wave of tenderness and passed back. They were softened by their own honesty and began to feel lonely and unwise. Experiences, not character, divided them. They were not dissimilar as humans go. Indeed, when compared with the people who stood nearest to them in point of space, they became practically identical. The Bill, who was holding an officer's polo pony, the Eurasian who drove the Nawab Bahadur's car, the Nawab Bahadur himself, the Nawab Bahadur's debauched grandson. None would have examined a difficulty so frankly and coolly. The mere fact of examination caused it to diminish. Of course they were friends, and forever. "Do you know what the name of that green bird up above us is?" she asked, putting her shoulder rather nearer to his. "Bee-eater." "Oh, no, Ronnie, it has red bars on its wings." "Parrot," he hazarded. "Good gracious, no." The bird in question dived into the dome of the tree. It was of no importance, yet they would have liked to identify it. It would somehow have solaced their hearts. But nothing in India is identifiable. The mere asking of a question causes it to disappear or to merge in something else. "McBride has an illustrated bird book," he said dejectedly. "I'm no good at all at birds. In fact, I'm useless at any information outside my own job. It's a great pity." "So am I. I'm useless at everything." "What do I hear?" shouted the Nawab Bahadur at the top of his voice, causing both of them to start. "What most improbable statement have I heard? An English lady useless? No, 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 no." He laughed genially, sure within limits of his welcome. "Hello, Nawab Bahadur. Been watching the polo again?" said Ronnie tepidly. "I have, Saab, I have." "How do you do?" said Adela, likewise pulling herself together. She held out her hand. The old gentleman judged from so wanton a gesture that she was new to his country, but he paid little heed. Women who exposed their face became, by that one act, so mysterious to him that he took them at the valuation of their menfolk rather than at his own. Perhaps they were not immoral, and anyhow, they were not his affair. On seeing the city magistrate alone with a maiden at twilight, he had borne down on them with hospitable intent. He had a new little car and wished to place it at their disposal. The city magistrate would decide whether the offer was acceptable. Ronnie was by this time rather ashamed of his curtness to Aziz and Godbole, and here was an opportunity of showing that he could treat Indians with consideration when they deserved it. So he said to Adela with the same sad friendliness that he'd employed when discussing the bird, "Would half an hour's spin entertain you at all? Oughtn't we to get back to the bungalow?" "Why?" He gazed at her. "I think perhaps I ought to see your mother and discuss future plans." "That's as you like. But there's no hurry, is there?" "Let me take you to the bungalow, and first the little spin," cried the old man, and hastened to the car. "He may show you some aspect of the country I can't. And he's a real loyalist. I thought you might care for a bit of a change." Determined to give him no more trouble, she agreed. But her desire to see India had suddenly decreased. There had been a factitious element in it. How should they seat themselves in the car? The elegant grandson had to be left behind. The Nawab Bahadur got up in front, for he had no intention of neighboring an English girl. "Despite my advanced years, I am learning to drive," he said. "Man can learn anything if he will but try." And foreseeing a further difficulty, he added, "I do not do the actual steering. I sit and ask my chauffeur questions, and thus learn the reason for everything that is done before I do it myself. By this method, serious and, I may say, ludicrous accidents such as befell one of my compatriots during that delightful reception at the English Club are avoided. Our good Panna Lal, I hope, Sahib, that great damage was not done to your flowers. Let us have our little spin down the Gangavati road, half 1 league onwards. He fell asleep. Ronnie instructed the chauffeur to take the Marabar road rather than the Gangavati, since the latter was under repair, and settled himself down beside the lady he had lost. The car made a burring noise and rushed along a chaussee that ran upon an embankment above melancholy fields. Trees of a poor quality bordered the road. Indeed, the whole scene was inferior and suggested that the countryside was too vast to admit of excellence. In vain did each item in it call out, "Come, come." There was not enough God to go round. The two young people conversed feebly and felt unimportant. When the darkness began, it seemed to well out of the meagre vegetation, entirely covering the fields each side of them before it brimmed over the road. Ronnie's face grew dim, an event that always increased her esteem for his character. Her hand touched his, owing to a jolt, and one of the thrills so frequent in the animal kingdom passed between them and announced that all their difficulties were only a lover's quarrel. Each was too proud to increase the pressure, but neither withdrew it, and a spurious unity descended on them, as local and temporary as the gleam that inhabits a firefly. It would vanish in a moment, perhaps to reappear, but the darkness is alone durable. And the night that encircled them, absolute as it seemed, was itself only a spurious unity, being modified by the gleams of day that leaked up round the edges of the earth, and by the stars. They gripped, bump, jump, a swerve, 2 wheels, lifted in the air, brakes on, bump with a tree, at the edge of the embankment, standstill. An accident. A slight one, nobody hurt. The Nawab Bahadur awoke. He cried out in Arabic and violently tugged his beard. "What's the damage?" inquired Ronnie after the moment's pause that he permitted himself before taking charge of a situation. The Eurasian, inclined to be flustered, rallied to the sound of his voice, and every inch an Englishman replied, "You give me 5 minutes' time, I'll take you any damn anywhere." Frightened, Adela? He released her hand. Not a bit. "I consider not to be frightened the height of folly," cried the Nawab Bahadur quite rudely. "Well, it's all over now. Tears are useless," said Ronnie, dismounting. "We had some luck butting that tree." "All over? Oh, yes, the danger is past. Let us smoke cigarettes. Let us do anything we please. Oh, yes, enjoy ourselves. Oh, my merciful God." His words died into Arabic again. "Wasn't the bridge? We skidded." "We didn't skid," said Adela, who had seen the cause of the accident and thought everyone must have seen it too. "We ran into an animal." A loud cry broke from the old man. His terror was disproportionate and ridiculous. "An animal?" "A large animal rushed up out of the dark on the right and hit us." "By Jove, she's right," Ronnie exclaimed. "The paint's gone." "By Jove, sir, your lady is right," echoed the Eurasian. Just by the hinges of the door was a dent, and the door opened with difficulty. "Of course I'm right. I saw its hairy back quite plainly." "I say, Adela, what was it?" "I don't know the animals any better than the birds here. Too big for a goat." "Exactly. Too big for a goat," said the old man. Ronnie said, "Let's go into this. Let's look for its tracks." "Exactly. You wish to borrow this electric torch?" The English people walked a few steps back into the darkness, united and happy. Thanks to their youth and upbringing, they were not upset by the accident. They traced back the writhing of the tires to the source of their disturbance. It was just after the exit from a bridge. The animal had probably come up out of the nullah. Steady and smooth ran the marks of the car, ribbons neatly nicked with lozenges. Then all went mad. Certainly some external force had impinged, but the road had been used by too many objects for any one track to be legible, and the torch created such high lights and black shadows that they could not interpret what it revealed. Moreover, Adela, in her excitement, knelt and swept her skirts about until it was she, if anyone, who appeared to have attacked the car. The incident was a great relief to them both. They forgot their abortive personal relationship and felt adventurous as they muddled about in the dust. "I believe it was a buffalo," she called to their host, who had not accompanied them. "Exactly." "Unless it was a hyena." Ronnie approved this last conjecture. Hyenas prowl in nullahs, and headlights dazzle them. "Excellent! A hyena!" said the Indian with an angry irony and a gesture at the night. "Mr. Harris?" "Half a moment. Give me 10 minutes' time." "Sahib says hyena." "Don't worry, Mr. Harris. He saved us from a nasty smash. Harris, well done." "A smash, Sahib, that would not have taken place had he obeyed and taken us Gangavati side instead of Marabar." "My fault there. I told him to come this way because the road's better. Mr. Leslie has made it pucker right up to the hills." "Ah, now I begin to understand." Seeming to pull himself together, he apologized, slowly and elaborately, for the accident. Ronnie murmured, "Not at all." But apologies were his due and should have started sooner. Because English people are so calm at crisis, it is not to be assumed that they are unimportant. The Nawab Bahadur had not come out very well. At that moment, a large car approached from the opposite direction. Ronnie advanced a few steps down the road and, with authority in his voice and gesture, stopped it. It bore the inscription Mudkul State across its bonnet. All friskiness and friendliness, Miss Derrick sat inside. Thank you all for joining me. The second part of Chapter 8 tomorrow at the same time and place, 5 Pacific at Fireside Reading on Instagram. Then we'll take a 2-day break because of, yes, you guessed it, Dancing with the Stars, the semi-finals coming up. Ooh, the tension. And then, for those of you who don't know, my wife is on doing Dancing with the Stars this year. And she's in the semi-finals, so it's very exciting. And then we will resume on the following Tuesday. So see you tomorrow at 5. Until then, everyone, please stay very, very well. Good night.